What's up guys, Lifting here. Welcome back to the fourth video in the series where we talk about what kind of stats or affixes one should want to get on an item in order for it to be either good, useful or valuable. And in this fourth video we will be talking about belts. And as I say in all my videos in this series, keep in mind that the stats or properties one wants on his or her equipment of course depends on the build that you're running. But the stats I'm going to recommend to you here in this video is most likely always going to be either good or useful for your character or valuable to sell to other characters. And also keep in mind that any rare item can have a total of 6 affixes, where 3 of those are prefixes and the remaining 3 suffixes. In order to get a really good item, you need the 6 most attractive or useful affixes that an item can roll. And you do of course want to roll the highest of these affixes as well. The higher item level of the item, the higher or better tier of affixes it can roll. So let's get started. Belts come in 6 base types with each their own implicit affix bonus. The implicit of the rustic sash is increased physical damage. For the chain belt it is added energy shield. The leather belt provides extra life. The heavy belt adds strength. The studded belt increased stun duration on enemies, and lastly the cloth belt provides increased stun recovery. And while the implicit rolls are different from each type, all of the belts can roll the same type of prefix and affixes. And in general you can say that the most useful or most valuable base types of belts is the leather belt or the rustic sash. Then after that the chain and heavy belt, and lastly the least attractive belt base type is the studded and cloth belts. And that's simply because people are more interested in getting increased life, physical damage and strength compared to stun duration on enemies and increased stun recovery. So let's take a look at the prefixes and suffixes these belts can roll. For prefixes you can see that a belt is able to roll physical damage returned to melee attacker, flat armor rating, increased maximum energy shield, flask life recovery rate, flask mana recovery rate, increased maximum life, and weapon elemental damage, also known as wet. Once again, remember that a rare belt can only have 3 prefixes, and the 3 most useful or valuable prefixes on this list is flat armor or energy shield, increased maximum life, and lastly weapon elemental damage. Those are the properties that most people will typically pay for or look for on a belt. For suffixes you have the options of rolling additional strength, flask charges gained, flask charges used, flask duration, life regeneration, fire, cold and lightning resistances, air resistance, increased stun duration, stun threshold reduction, and increased stun recovery. And the 3 most useful or valuable suffixes are either of the elemental resistances, so fire, cold and lightning, added strength or chaos resistance. And now with that knowledge of prefix and suffixes, let me show you an example of what I would consider the ideal mix between the affixes. First we have added armor, increased maximum life and weapon elemental damage. That's the 3 prefixes. Then we have fire, cold and lightning resistances, so tri-resistance rolls. Another example would be increased energy shield, increased maximum life, increased weapon elemental damage, and then lightning resistance, fire resistance, chaos resistance or added strength. And while this belt doesn't have all the 3 elemental resistances, it does instead offer chaos resistance or added strength, which can be very useful for certain belts. And belts are pretty straightforward when it comes to rolling the right type of suffixes. In most cases you simply want either tri-res or dual resistance rolls, plus either added strength or chaos resistance. For prefixes, it kinda depends on what build you're running yourself. You obviously don't want to roll weapon elemental damage if your build doesn't support or benefit from this. However, if you do, just keep in mind that there's probably another player who does, and if you get the other beneficial prefixes and suffixes, then there's most likely someone who would be interested in buying that from you. Also keep in mind that, as I said in the beginning of the video, people typically prefer buying or using either leather or rustic sash belts. Chain and heavy belts aren't too bad either. And as I also mentioned in my previous videos, an item does not always necessarily need to have 6 properties or affixes in order to be good. Having a belt with just life along with dual resistance rolls sells pretty easy depending on the tier rolls of the affixes of course. And if an item has room for an additional prefix or suffix, people sometimes use an exalt orb in the hopes of getting that last good suffix or prefix roll. And you can of course use master crafting for this as well, but just keep in mind that only by using the exalted orb you can roll the highest or best tier rolls of the properties. Master crafting will not be able to do that for you. Now lastly, let me show you a few examples of belts on PoE trade that I consider valuable items. And on this first example you'll notice that this belt has all the ideal prefix and suffix rolls, so life, flat armor and weapon elemental damage. Those are the prefixes. For suffixes it has managed to roll tri-resist rolls, fire, cold and lightning. Additionally, we're dealing with one of the most valuable base types, namely the leather belt, that has the implicit of adding more life. So basically this belt has rolled all the valuable prefix and suffix rolls, it has the right implicit mod, and that is why this belt is going to sell easily, even though the tier rolls could have been better. And here's another example of a belt that has rolled the right type of prefixes and suffixes. On this heavy belt we can see that it has rolled life and added energy shield. And as you can see, this belt only has these two prefixes. For suffixes it has rolled dual resistance rolls and strength. Because it has two of the ideal prefix rolls and 3 good suffix rolls, there will be a lot of potential buyers for this belt and its like. Belts that provide this much strength are often very popular simply because it allows certain builds to reach certain strength requirements for either their skill gems or items without having to spec into the strength notables throughout the skill tree. And also keep in mind that for each 10 added strength points your character gains 5 HP and 2% increased melee physical damage. And yeah, belts are pretty straightforward. Even if the belt only provides increased maximum life and dual resistance rolls, they can typically be sold if the tier rolls are good enough, of course. And as usual, I would like to tell you guys exactly how much these items are worth. However, as I always say, I simply can't. There are way too many variables to take into consideration, but just keep in mind that if the belt have the right type of prefix and suffixes that I have demonstrated in this video, then it will most likely be worth something and fairly easy to sell. And the value of the belt of course depends on how good the rolls of the affixes are, and prices greatly varies and goes from 1 to 2 chaos orbs to 200s of exalted orbs. So yeah. Now, as always, I'll leave a link to PoE mods in the description. In here you can look up the specific items and see what kind of affixes it can roll and what item level they require to get the good tier rolls. Anyway guys, hope you found this useful. Thank you for watching, and bros, do you even nerd?